The only alliance, military hard alliance we have left is NATO, and NATO is an anachronism, and we're seeing it developing into a tool of great power politics and not of defense.
Thank you so much for being with us, for your time, and for coming to Tbilisi, because this is really very interesting to have this kind of forum here, to have all of you here, and to discuss with you very important issues of the contemporary world order. So what I would like to discuss with you is a kind of the neutrality on one hand and the multipolarity on the other. The conflict which is now is ongoing in Ukraine, that somehow destructed the idea of neutrality on the European continent, because the former neutral countries like Sweden, Finland, even Austria and Switzerland, they somehow they lost their neutrality. They took part in this conflict somehow. Even Sweden and Finland became the part of NATO. So Austria and Switzerland, they joined the sanctions. Even Switzerland gave the armaments to Ukraine and etc. So somehow
no armaments, humanitarian goods.
Yes,
humanitarian goods.
So some so-called military aid, but military health aid or something. Medical aid.
Medical aid that can be used for military purposes, but it's not. That's the one thing they didn't do. They didn't send weapons, which is a good thing.
Yes. So how do you think that, is that the kind of the final destruction of idea of neutrality, at least on the European continent?
Yes and no. On the one hand, yes, the neutralities did lose a lot on the European continent. Funnily enough, we're seeing that in the whole world, and especially in the global south, neutrality is now having a revival, and also neutralism and non-alignment. But on the other hand, you know, it's not the case that this is happening for the first time. Every single war in Europe, be it a hot war or a cold war, always leads to the destruction of some neutrals, and it usually leads to the birth of new neutrals. So Finland and Sweden are, of course, the obvious examples right now. But just think about how the end of the Cold War also destroyed neutral Yugoslavia. But now look at how Serbia is actually trying also, they officially call their foreign policy military neutrality. So there's something new that came out of that. Georgia, in my view, is actually on a neutral foreign policy route, even if it's not a foreign policy principle yet and not in the constitution, but at least what it is doing in international relations is very close to kind of neutrality policy, and it might well develop in that way. So we will still see whether Austrian and Swiss neutrality and Irish neutrality will survive this moment. They might go away. Although all three of them have the neutrality in their constitution, it's just like Malta, that's a very strong anchor that's difficult to overcome. Sweden and Finland didn't have it in the constitution, which is why it was easy to overcome within basically 20 years. But Georgia might well become the counterexample to that. Not having actually an article in your constitution that says that you want to join NATO and so on, but then actually not doing it, and give it 10, 15, 20 years. The mood might change, and at some point even a constitutional revision might become possible. And even if not, a neutral foreign policy can serve the country very well for decades to come. So we will see where it's going. So in a sense, I'm not fatalistic about it, but obviously there are problems that. There were neutrals that we lost, and we didn't lose them for the better. That Finland and Sweden are now not neutral anymore is not going to make the security situation in Europe better. It actually makes it worse.
So they are actually not neutral in the wartime. But what do you think about the after the war ends? What is going to be the conditions for these countries like in between, for instance, in the Eastern European side? Because even the neutrality of the Finland is a result of the World War II somehow, because this was a kind of agreement with the Stalin regime, etc. So, what could be the result of this war? I mean, could it be kind of, for instance, there is on the table the neutrality of Ukraine on the negotiations. So, what is your vision about the neutrality in the Ukraine, in the European continent after the war?
I mean, Ukraine is the best example for why a neutral Ukraine would have been so much better than this goddamn war, right? The neutrality of Ukraine was actually part of the constitution. It was then taken out, and it was escalated into the situation that it became in the Donbass, like a regional and a local war. And then we had neutrality again on the table in 2022 in April. It was on the table. It was initial. It was basically done as a solution in order to square the circle, right? To say like, okay, Ukraine, you cannot be a battering ram against Russia, but on the other hand, Ukraine, of course, you are sovereign and everything, and you can have the relationship with the EU that you want. And for the Europeans, it wasn't enough. I didn't understand it at the time, but I understand it now. This deal was torpedoed and destroyed by the European or by the NATO side, by Boris Johnson, by the UK, but by NATO in general. They said like, no, let's motivate Ukraine to fight the good fight against Russia and get everything and break Russia up. And it didn't work. It didn't work. And now the situation is that we have hundreds of thousands, maybe more than 1 million people dead, probably on both sides. And we're still left with the situation that Ukraine, at the end of this process, there still will be a Ukraine in one form or another, and but that Ukraine will still be somehow under somehow a security threat to Russia, and Russia will demand that it's neutral. So if this is going to end, it's going to end probably with some form of de facto or de jure neutrality of what is left of Ukraine that it could have had so much cheaper. But you know what? The sad thing is, we Europeans do that all the time. Look at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, how the thing broke up, and the Austria that we have today is a neutral rump state. You know, people talk about Ukraine becoming a rump state and that it cannot live. Nonsense. Austria has been living a good life since 1955 as a neutral rump state in the heart of Europe. It can be a very good position, but it needs to be a position that people want and then want to deal with. And that's where Austria, but also Finland, did something pragmatic. They said, the best thing we can do, the best we can get now is our independence and our sovereignty back by virtue of being neutral, which means that our neutrality needs to serve the others, especially the Finns. They realized that their neutrality needs to be a neutrality that serves the security purposes of Russia, the Soviet Union, and they did so. They implemented that. In return, they got more leeway. They got more wiggle room, more than Poland or Romania, etc., who were part of the Warsaw Pact, and they could actually Europeanize. They could have a much more accommodating, like, economic order, and that's the big thing you can get from neutrality. You don't get everything, but you get a good deal if you manage to serve both sides.
In that regard, how do you feel about you mentioned, and before we started this interview, we talked about the Georgia's article in the Constitution regarding the Euro-Atlantic integration. How much actually adequate it is for the ongoing global shifting process right now? If let's say, if the multipolarity is really emerging, if that really happens, this kind of shift really happens, how much being in one's particular camp, which is against another's, how much it is clever?
It's not clever at all. It's a stupid idea. I mean, no country should want to be in a camp where it's becoming an implementation tool for the ideas of others, right? The best position is for a country to have as much flexibility in its foreign policy as possible in order to adapt to the situation and then do what's good for the country. What the European Union is currently going through is a really weird ideological moment when they believe that it is actually better to be part of a great collective, even if that means suffering horribly, but because you have to fight the good fight and fight evil, it is kind of a moral duty. I mean, that's not a rationalist and not a realist approach to foreign policy. It's an ideological one. It's like, saying like, oh, we Christians must go on a crusade in order to conquer back the Holy Land from the heathens. I mean, that's a moral obligation. And they're in a very similar place at the moment, but when it comes to how they portray Russia and China and so on, and how they see themselves as defending the values that they claim to be defending. So it's not a clever thing to actually then be part of such a club. It's a much more clever policy to have as good as possible a relationship with that club, while trying to have good as possible a relationship with the other clubs or with the other players. Because one thing, neither the Russians nor the Chinese, and not even the Iranians, are playing the alliance game. They are collaborating in certain issues, but they're not forming alliances. The only alliance, military hard alliance we have left is NATO, and NATO is an anachronism, and we're seeing it developing into a tool of great power politics and not of defense.
But on the other hand, when we speak about the multipolarity, when there is an unipolarity, everything is clear. Yep. So there is one power, either you are the friend of them, or you are a kind of enemy, or even if you are the neutral country, so
you get attacked.
Yeah, you can be attacked, or to be in the friends camp somehow. Yeah, this is the picture in the unipolarity. When it is multipolar war, at least bipolar war, does that leave the room for neutrality? Because that's when it is the choice that you have to somehow this 3 or 4 or 2 at least centers of independent global power. So, and does that make kind of the possibility for the small countries, especially on the borders of one big power, to be neutral, to be kind of not to be in the camp of one of them?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So the least conducive international system to neutrality is unipolarity, for the reason that you outlined, because everything is pretty clear, and if you don't follow along, then you're gonna get hammered. Bipolarity, there is some space for that, but in a multipolarity, the pressure to be neutral will even increase, because again, you will get a lot of demands from different sides, and especially buffer states that are in between. The structural incentive to, if they are not captured ideologically, I must say. Like there are states that are, like in the EU, they are captured ideologically, but if you're not captured ideologically and you have a vision that you need to achieve the best possible outcome for your country, then the structural incentive is to play with everybody and to figure out a way, not only how to have a friendly relationship, but also how to use those relationships in order to balance the others, right? In order for yourself to develop as far as possible. So the structural incentive will increase, and we're seeing that right now. We're seeing border states, Mongolia, it's not officially neutral, but it's using for all intents and purposes a neutrality policy. Oman is doing so, and at the end of the Iran war, the other Gulf states are going to be de facto or de jure neutralized as well, because they're not going to have a partner left to actually get all of this military supplies from. So, and the global south at the moment, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has a neutrality clause in its own, on its books, and they're using that. Malaysia and Indonesia champion it. South America has important movements that talk about it, and in the global south, it's more or less clear that what you don't want is hard alliances. What you do want is flexible friendships, and that is going to be a neutrality policy in one way or another. For a country like Georgia, there's even more incentive to kind of think about this also in a de jure way, in order to formulate a policy that can then over years hopefully lead to the goals that your Prime Minister outlined today, which is also territorial integrity. But for Georgia, neutrality is a way to get back this territorial integrity if the conflict with Russia can be properly solved. But if there's a way, then it is through that one.
So to summarize our conversation, I would like to ask you about my concern, what I think about Georgia's position and Georgia's somehow the prospects which is emerging after the multipolarity. So what I see, and maybe this is kind of just to share my concerns about it. And so what I see that all the world orders has emerged after the big catastrophe like the World War II, or even it was also the big catastrophe, kind of the collapse of the Soviet Union and this kind of the new nations which erupted, the new nations which were not aware of what to do and how to develop further, and etc. So but now we have the circumstances when the big powers, they do understand that to have a kind of direct war between each other, it's a huge catastrophe that can end the world, kind of the nuclear war, etc. So in that regards, this is becoming more and more popular to have the kind of proxy wars, like in Ukraine, like in Iran, or etc. So how to survive in that regard, because the new world order is not established yet. This is not the kind of declared multipolarity. It's emerging multipolarity. All the powers that struggle to put themselves on the globe and to say that this is my place, and etc. So that means that the confrontation is still on the go.
Yeah.
So, and it is kind of the really serious, the one like Georgia, like a small country like Georgia, needs kind of serious efforts to survive being not being used as a proxy war.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That must be one of the prime goals, I think, of Georgia, not to be abused the way that Ukraine is being abused. And, abused from both sides. That's the thing. The Russians do the killing and the Europeans do the pushing, right, of all of these people who then have to go to the front wall. So the main issue is like how to not be in that position. And, Gramsci is the one who said, right, the old order is gone, the new one hasn't arisen yet. It's the time of monsters, right? And we are in the time of monsters. This is the time of monsters. And the people, the greatest monsters, will always pretend that they're the greatest angels, right? The Europeans are pretending that they're the defenders of human rights, democracy, and Ukraine and whatnot, and the Russians are pretending that they are the defenders of the civilized world, and that they are, that they have no other choice, and so on and so forth. And in the middle, we've got poor Ukrainians that are dying in the trenches, and Russians too, by the way. I mean, a lot of Russians dying too. Like the dying is happening, and it's usually done, by the poor class, by the poor people. So anyone who doesn't have a lot of money should be very, very interested in their country to actually figure out how to have that not happening. And the important thing there is to always focus on what is good for you and what can I do, what can I not do. So what kind of improvements with Russia are possible, what is not possible, what kind of interaction with the EU is possible and what not, and how do I, wiggle room, create more wiggle room in order to maneuver, because the more wiggle room you have, the bigger the buffer to either side, right? So it's very, very difficult. But thinking about this seriously and having also a vision of a foreign policy that's good for Georgia is essential. And I'm glad to see, listening to your politicians, that they do have such a vision, which is gone and absent from the European Union, which is why we are in the situation we are today.
Pascal, thank you so much for your time and for your ideas you shared with us.
Thank you very much for your interest.